Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You tune into India Tonight with me, Sumita Karir, and my colleague Shibani Garat. Tonight, we're putting the focus on the aviation sector. In early December, airports across the country witnessed massive chaos. And you'd remember that IndiGo's failure to comply with the DGCA's pilot fatigue rules virtually led to the collapse of the airline. 4,500 flight cancellations in just 10 days. That exposed the harsh reality of the Indian aviation sector. In fact, Indian aviation is highly reliant on just two airlines, that is IndiGo and Air India Group, and thus creating a sort of duopoly. But, ladies and gentlemen, that's about to change.
Absolutely, that's about to change. Sumita, this is why the news of Civil Aviation Ministry granting NOCs to two new airlines last week has been met with great cheer. With Civil Aviation Ministry move, India is poised to get three more airlines soon. UP-based Shankh Air is slated to start operations in 2025. Kerala-based Hind Airlines and Fly Express too have gotten NOC. But will these new entries break the domination of IndiGo that has almost 63% market share? Before we begin the discussion, Charu is getting us more details on the new airlines. Charu, over to you.
As per a recent social media post made by the Aviation Minister of the country, Hind Air, which is owned by a Kerala-based group, has gotten a no-objection certificate from the government. Now, this is an approval that has been granted only for initial approval cycles. Several other licenses still need to be acquired by the airline. Now, airline is going to focus on the southern regions and is going to be Kerala-based. It is a company that has been operating in the tour and travel management arena for the last 3 decades. However, it now wishes to enter into the aviation space and give customers more of a choice to fly in the southern regions. Now, it is going to enter the landscape with 3 ATR 72-600 turbo planes. Apart from this, 2 other airlines that are set to join the regional fleet of the country include Shankh Air, that is a Uttar Pradesh-based airline, and other than that, there is Fly Express, the website of which shows that it is ready to start its operations in a little while. However, all of these airlines do not have the complete licensing yet, but they are on the path to get it. Since 2020, the government has given the green light to several regional airlines, and it remains to be seen how they enter the Indian aviation landscape. The developments come after the recent flight crisis that was created when IndiGo cancelled over 4,000 of its flights due to the unavailability of its staff in accordance with the new DGCA norms that dealt with pilot and crew fatigue.
All right. Thank you very much, Charu, for bringing us all of those details related to the 3 new airlines that are expressing interest in starting commercial operations. In fact, to discuss whether they are going to be profitable and whether the duopoly of the aviation sector is going to be broken. To discuss that and more, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now joined by Siddharth Verma. He's an aviation expert, and Satish Modh. He's also an aviation expert. Thank you very much, Mr. Verma and Mr. Modh, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mr. Verma. Now, 3 airlines have expressed interest in starting operations. In fact, one has been given a nod as well, an NOC as well. The other 2 will also be given. These are backed by investors, I believe. But how confident are you of the proposals that have come in, given the fact that we've seen the failure of at least 18 airlines if you combine regional and national both?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me over, and that's a very interesting and pertinent question you put out there. I think it needs to be put in perspective, first of all, that while this is very heartening news, of course, but there is a long way to go before we actually see the wings in air, or a major difference in the number of seats being offered to the domestic market. We all understand that only the initial NOC has been awarded to the 3 airlines for now, which is obviously the first step. Going forward from here, they will obviously have to move into the more complicated and more complex procedures of actually getting the scheduled airline license, which can take anything from 4 to 5 to 6 months, or even more, depending on the readiness of each of the airlines. There is a lot of work which still needs to be done in terms of getting the aircraft, getting the crew ready, getting the systems, procedures, manuals, everything. So it's a fair amount of work. In fact, the main work starts now. Having said that, assuming that all 3 of them see light of day, all 3 of them start operations maybe 6 to 8 months from now, Well, let's be very honest here. We are talking about an airline like IndiGo, which has 400 plus aircraft, maybe 500, close to 500 now. Air India, which has another huge fleet of 300 plus aircraft. And these guys haven't become such large airlines overnight. I mean, they've been there for since many, many years now. And they have put in a lot of the hard yards before they became such huge behemoths, so to speak. So to expect that somebody who can starting in 2026 will immediately pose a challenge to any of these three guys, at
Absolutely.
least in the small, short to medium run, is expecting too much. But I
Yes.
think the fact that one of them, at least we know for a fact, like Al Hind, is looking at the ATRs and turboprops. I think this is my personal belief that the large part of the next growth in aviation is going to come from the regional and the sub-regional routes. Also because of the fact that there is a massive amount of saturation in the trunk
Of
routes
course,
and
of
in the
course,
metro routes.
of course, Mr.
So I
Verma.
think
Yes, of
that
course. I will also ask Mr. Modh his inputs on this. And, if you can also throw in some, perspective on coming up of these regional airlines and how much potential does it actually have to disrupt the airspace, so to speak? What are some of the examples that you can get in from the other matured markets, like an airspace like India and with so many airports also coming up? So, how much potential do they have to disrupt the airspace? Mr. Modh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Actually, talking about disruption is, I don't think it is the right word, because our airline market, when it was freed, say in 1995, and we had seen so many airlines at that time, East West Airlines and Damania Airways, all of them were there. They could not survive more than 5 to 6 years. After that, another set of airlines came up, like Kingfisher and Jet Airways. They survived 8 to 10 years and they also collapsed. So airline business is not a easy business. Here to survive in the market is like a sabji market or a perishable market, where you have to continuously plan your capacity and sell in the right time. What happens is that when you buy the aircraft and you don't have proper routes and you don't have proper capacity, it is difficult to survive. Most of the airlines, they take a plane either on wait lease or dry lease. If you are taking plane on wait lease, you have to fill in at least 80% capacity to survive. If you are taking on dry lease and using your own crew, you have to have at least 60 to 62% capacity. But if you look at all these airlines who could not survive, is simply because they could not fill the capacity. It is good that some new airlines are joining, but again, if you look at the critical, capacity of the plane, if you don't have 30 to 40 aircraft, you will not be in a position to maintain your schedule. So looking at all these technicalities, SpiceJet and say Akasha Air, now Akasha Air has grown from 4 to 5 planes to 40 planes. So now they are able to maintain their schedule.
Right.
If you look at SpiceJet, they expanded, but still they are not still able to maintain their
Right.
schedule. So for these new airlines, it is too early to talk
Right,
about
and
their
Mr. Modh, they have
future.
not been able
They
to
have to
give
keep on.
competition to IndiGo, and that really is the main problem. That really is the core issue that we're trying to address here, to break the
There
duopoly,
is
to
no
have more and more
competition to
players come
IndiGo
into
or
the
Air
system,
India.
and
I
to,
would
of
say
course,
that
offer use flyers more options, given the fact that the kind of chaos we did see unfold when the IndiGo fiasco happened. In fact, it has happened multiple times over the past couple of months, but since flyers don't have ample options, they are left with no choice. But let me come to you, Mr. Verma. Mr. Verma, all the points that Mr. Modh had essentially made, and you also said that, license is going to take another 6 to 8 months, and then you also expressed some cynicism. Is having a viable alternative to IndiGo, is that unrealistic? Is that what both of you are essentially hinting at? And if yes, then why?
Well, I would not use the word cynicism in my case. I think it's more of experience talking, and it's just procedural timelines. I'm not saying that 6 to 8 months is a long time. It's just the amount of time it normally takes for an airline to actually take off physically. And now coming back to your other point, whether somebody can actually challenge IndiGo, we're talking about a giant here, really, and we expect that someone who's just starting up today or tomorrow will be able to take up, if David versus the Goliath. Although in that particular example, of course, it went with the underdog. But in this particular case, I think it's going to be a fair amount of time, as Satish mentioned already, and I agree with him. Taking off is not that difficult. 6 to 8 months, and like I said, they'll all take off eventually. It's the actual sustaining in the long run, and then to be able to challenge someone like a Vistara or a Casa or an Indigo on the routes is it's going to be more than a simple challenge. I mean,
Absolutely. It's
we're talking
important to
about very, very big
sustain
deep
in
pockets
the
here.
long run. As you mentioned, it's important to sustain in the long run. So, given your expertise, in spite of, the experts remaining skeptical about the new entrants, given your expertise, Mr. Verma, if you can help us understand, given India's history as a graveyard for airlines, what fundamental changes need to be implemented beyond just, giving out licenses or no objections certificates to move players, into like a more sustainable competition and prevent the consolidation that we have seen over the past many years, like, Vistara going and becoming a part of Air India kind of consolidation, and also a lot of airlines which were mentioned by, our other panelists on the show today on how they came in, like the East-West Airlines, or Modi Luft was there a couple of years ago, Kingfisher was there. So how do you keep that model sustainable? What are some of the examples from the other markets like Europe, like US for that matter?
A very, very good question, I must say. And to answer the last part first, if you look at America, which is obviously a developed market, I mean, last year it carried about 875 million passengers. It has almost 83 domestic carriers flying daily. Like I said, 875 million passengers is a serious amount of number of people. The second largest market happens to be China, which carried about 750 million, passengers, having more than 30 plus carriers. If you look at the next one is the UK, Spain, India is somewhere fifth, which and last year we carried about 200 and 210 odd million passengers. So even the per capita seats per, if you look at it, in America, there are like 3 passenger seats per passenger. In India, we have only 0.13. Now, what that really means is, in terms of opportunity, we have a massive opportunity opening up. So I don't think the opportunity is going to be a problem if we are geared up to take a ramp up. We can ramp up in time, to take advantage of the opportunity. I think the challenge lies in the entire ecosystem now. And when I say that, let me just break it down a little bit quickly. One is, of course, you have supply chain issues already. I mean, we have about what 1,700 to 2,000 planes on order. I mean, we have a backlog with the two largest companies being Airbus and Boeing. Are their their order books are pending for like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years behind time now. Even if you have the airline, I mean the airliners coming in time, where are you going to park them in India? The airport's obviously coming up, which is fantastic. But it's going to be a while before they are in a position to absorb 2,000 parking bays. Thirdly, your challenges are in terms of the manpower, the number of pilots. By some estimates, we need 25,000 airline pilots in the next 10 years. 25,000. I mean, just can you imagine that? That's like a mind-bending number. So those are the challenges. Now, what are the solutions? The solution is that there has to be an overall revamp of the ecosystem, which the government is doing, I believe so. And I'm not a cynic there, because I see it, whether it's the UDAN scheme, or whether it's new airlines coming up, or whether new airports opening up, new MROs, people setting up production lines in India. So definitely they are working on the ecosystem, but there is a lead time to everything. We are talking about extremely capital intensive, technology intensive business. So you are going to see the results, yes, but 3 to 5 years from now. And these guys, whoever they are, will have to sustain somehow for the 3 to 5 years. But just to quickly add one more little point to it, I noticed
So
with the news
these
that
are
one of the
best.
airlines is coming with a turboprop fleet, looking at regional routes. I think that is probably the key to success here, at least not getting into trunk routes from day one.
Right. So these at best can become regional options, Mr. Verma, is essentially what you're hinting at. And of course, there is a gestation period that is going to go into the becoming of these airlines and when they can become viable competitors to IndiGo. But let me get in your thoughts on this, Mr. Modh. What does it really take to sustain an airline, especially a low-cost airline, and that too when ATF actually accounts for a majority of the airline costs, plus there are GST and other leasing costs involved as well. So what does it really take to sustain an airline and to make it successful?
You know, from our experiences, last 15, 20 years and all those disappearing airlines, I would say that until unless India starts manufacturing our own planes, we will never be cost effective because the cost of basic aircraft is so high that no airline will be able to sustain the lease rent, whether they are taking it on lease or they are buying the plane outright. So the government's attempt to have an agreement with Russia to have 100 capacity airplane being made in India, that will be available in less than 50% of the current cost of acquisition. So until unless we focus on aircraft manufacturing in our country, and like Airbus is there, which is catering to European market, or Boeing or McDonnell, other airlines were there, manufacturers were there who were supplying to their local market. So if, and China airlines are surviving because they are manufacturing their planes. So for India to actually make a mark in aviation sector, all the focus of the government has to be there to start manufacturing planes in the country. Until unless we do that, we will never be able to create a cost-effective airline structure, whether it
Absolutely.
is IndiGo or whether it is Air India.
Manufacturing our own planes is what you are saying, because getting in planes from the outside also becomes expensive for many of these airlines. Also, licensing and getting the planes becomes very expensive. But having said that, we already have in place one scheme called the UDAN scheme, which was mentioned by Mr. Verma earlier. Mr. Modh, my question to you is, how can this UDAN scheme be utilized by these new players? What can be done under the UDAN scheme to help this sector grow further, let's say in the next 5 years till 2030?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And in fact, the government need to focus on that. And UDAN will work only, say, for 600 kilometers to 1,000 kilometer distance flights, where you can charge less rent. And those planes need to replace high density air train travels. So until unless these airlines start focusing on a particular region, I remember Captain Gopinath, when he started the airline, he was focusing on the South Indian market. Or SpiceJet, when they started, they were focusing on high density South Indian market, and they were doing very well. But the moment they became ambitious and they wanted to spread across the country, they were not able to survive. So these new airlines, they have to identify a market where they can park their plane at the low cost. You know, the parking cost is very high at any airport. So if these planes start parking at Mumbai, Delhi, or a bigger airport, they will become bankrupt in no period of time. So they have to identify airports where they can park their plane at low cost, and then connect to those sectors where there is a low cost of landing and parking. Because this landing parking is more than 7 to 8% of the cost of the flight, which people don't even look at it. So we'll have to look at the cost of acquiring the equipment. We have to look at the airports where the cost of landing and parking is less. All other things remain same. Until unless they start planning in this way, they will not be able to survive if they don't do this. If they start parking plane at Trivandrum, the landing and parking charges will be very high. So they need to identify smaller airports, and they have to develop a new market. Until unless they develop a new market, I would say that whatever they will do, if they try to compete on the trunk routes, they will not be able to compete with IndiGo or Air India or Air India Express.
Right, Mr. Modh, the market already exists. The market already exists because we have a duopoly in the market. But of course, these airlines and these flights need to come up with their own models, business models that are sustainable and those are profitable, and they don't go bust in a couple of years, given the fact that, like you rightly stated, that there is a cost that is attached, and the cost of operating in the aviation sector is quite huge. let me come to you, Mr. Verma. Mr. Verma, does the government now really need to look at ATF, which needs to be brought under GST, because 75% of the payouts, including other factors related to revenues, are related to ATF, and which is what really makes this business a cost-guzzling business? Then what kind of aid can the government specifically look at bringing in into the aviation sector? For instance, it could be related to tax holiday. What is it that you're proposing wherein the government can sort of aid these private players to sort of get a kickstart, and then from that point onwards they can start operating?
Well, they've already done or taken a few steps. For example, setting up Gift City in India, in Gandhinagar. Now that takes care of at least to a large extent, the withholding tax issue, which is 10% of your lease cost in any case. Also, the fact that adding to a little bit of what Satish said earlier, and I think your previous question about UDAN scheme, I think that itself is a huge answer that the government is doing, or rather, the government is taking a step forward. UDAN scheme offers so many incentives to various regional and small operators because whether it's the ATF is cheaper, whether it's landing parking charges are cheaper, your passenger there's a cap on the airfare for the passengers, so which will obviously spur demand. Also, it specifically caters to the 600 kilometers or less kind of distances, which are the interland areas, the last mile connectivity. And a very interesting, a very important point here, again, to add to the answer about what the government can do or what it is already doing. Under the UDAN scheme, since they've also included seaplane services. It is actually going one step further beyond the regional, sub-regional routes to places where there is no airport. India being blessed with water, the seaplanes come into play immediately, whether it's the landlocked states which have dams and lakes and rivers and backwaters, or whether it's the coast. So the moment the government has taken the seaplane services under the UDAN scheme, it has actually taken a big step forward to address the issue of how to make the aviation sector sustainable. Because I also believe that the large part of your next big sort of jump or fillip to aviation is not going to come on the trunk routes, which are anyway saturated, or the non-trunk routes or the tier 2 city routes. I think the biggest growth now going forward next 5 to 10 years is going to come from regional routes, which includes your turboprops, your seaplanes, and I think another major step the government has taken already is extending the UDAN scheme from 2026 to 2036 by another 10 years.
Sure.
These are things now the government can give the policy and then give you the playground. It's for the
Yes.
players to play it right. Now,
Yes.
just last thing that I want to quickly mention, Satish mentioned that if you want to start with 737s and A320s on trunk routes against established players like Air India and Akasa and IndiGo, I mean, that's suicide. And I think no prudent airline businessman is going to even looking at those routes. I think that's why one of them is looking at the ATRs. I'm guessing the other two also be looking at turboprops. So I think the answer is already there. Now it is one needs to be smart about it, I guess.
One needs to be smart about it, and also something that, Mr. Modh said, I'm going to pick your brain on, having these smaller alternate airports. Like New York has a John F. Kennedy and it has a Newark airport. And many of the local regional airlines land in Newark. Paris has Charles de Gaulle, where all the international flights land, and all the regional ones, the regional European flights, mostly, they also land in Charles de Gaulle. But of course, there is an Orly airport for them to land. So something that, creating an alternate airport in these major hubs like Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi. Mumbai already has one, but Delhi, Bangalore, and, the big cities in the coming days, and connecting them to these regions will help, these regional airlines find that sweet spot when it comes to profitability and better operations going forward. Is that also what you're saying as well?
Yes, absolutely. But just adding to what you said, that's an interesting idea. For example, in Delhi, you already have Hindon. Now, Hindon was a very small, sleepy airport, but ever since they've taken it under the UDAN scheme, can you imagine Hindon now is saturated already in the last 6-8 months? So the problem is that even if you open these smaller airports and allow the large players, it will be the existing players who will take advantage of that first already. Because there is saturation at Delhi airport, so they have no other choice but to go to the closest airport, which happens to be Hindon. Now, the international airport, Jewar, for example, opening up, wait and see in the next year or 2 years, even that will be saturated already. So Delhi, anyway, is one of the busiest airports in the country. Delhi and Mumbai, they sort of alternate, sometimes Mumbai, sometimes Delhi. So the fact is now that we have a Navi Mumbai airport, of course, it's going to take away a little bit of the pressure from the current Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport. The new Jewar Airport is obviously going to take away a little bit of pressure from DIL. But the way we expect aviation in India to continue growing at 10 to 11%, over the next 5 to 7 years, or maybe in 10 years. That's looking at about 30 million people, close to 30 million people, new passengers being added to India's flying population in the next 10 years. So you imagine, no matter these small airports will not really help in the long run. They can maybe take away a little bit of the pressure, but that's about it. They will get saturated faster than we can create them. I think like I said, the government probably has done that, and I think probably will have to continue thinking out of the box and get into places where you don't have to build airports. You get seaplanes, you don't need
Absolutely.
airports.
Yeah.
Water is free, right? So
Right, Mr.
that
Verma.
is the out of the box solution.
Right, Mr. Verma, that's a very valid point. That's a valid point that you're making, that we should be making more local sort of airports, and that's essentially what the government of India is looking at with the construction of many more local airports. But what really needs to happen and needs to be given the focus is the fact that the airlines that are currently operating in the country, they need to run a viable commercial operation without the kind of delays that we have seen, and that really is the need of the hour. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out and sharing your thoughts and perspectives on how to break this duopoly in the Indian aviation sector. What will it really take to do that? Thank you very much. We do appreciate you taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now, ladies and gentlemen. With that, it's time